The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Captain Marcus Wellington adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the 100th time. His polished boots reflected the golden light as he stood at attention with his fellow guards, preparing for another day of royal duties. At 45, Marcus had served in the Royal Guard for over 2 decades, but lately, something felt different about his purpose. The ceremony that day was like many others, dignitaries arriving, photographers, clicking away in the usual formal proceedings. But as Marcus scanned the crowd of onlookers gathered behind the iron gates, his eyes stopped on an elderly man in a worn military jacket. The man's weathered hands gripped the bars as he watched the ceremony with tears streaming down his face. During his break, Marcus found himself drawn to the gates where the old veteran still stood. The man introduced himself as Albert Thompson, a World War II veteran who had traveled 3 hours by bus just to see the changing of the guard. Albert's voice shook as he explained that his late son had always dreamed of serving in the Royal Guard, but had been killed in Afghanistan before he could apply. Something stirred deep within Marcus as he listened to Albert's story. Here was a man who had given everything for his country, yet he stood outside looking in, separated by iron bars and protocol. That evening, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Albert's tear-filled eyes and trembling hands clutching the gate. The next morning, Marcus arrived early and found Albert in the same spot. This time, he had brought a thermos of hot tea and a chair from the guard station. As he handed them through the bars to the surprised veteran, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He quietly arranged for Albert to receive a special escort to the front row of the ceremony. When Albert saw the royal guard approaching him with an invitation to step inside the gates, his knees nearly gave way. Marcus personally escorted the elderly veteran to a place of honor, where Albert could feel the pride and dignity he deserved. As the ceremony began, other guards noticed what Marcus had done, and something beautiful started to take root in their hearts. Word spread quickly among the guards about Marcus's gesture. Some questioned whether he had overstepped his authority, but most felt a stirring of something they had forgotten in their years of rigid protocol. They remembered why they had chosen to serve, not just to protect buildings and follow rules, but to honor those who had paved the way for their freedom. That afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visit from Colonel Harrison, the head of palace security. The colonel's stern expression made Marcus's heart race as he prepared for disciplinary action. Instead, the colonel placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder and said words that would echo through the halls forever. "Son, you reminded us all what true service looks like." The story of Albert and Marcus spread beyond the palace walls when a photographer captured the moment the elderly veteran saluted the guards with tears of joy streaming down his face. The image appeared in newspapers across the country, touching hearts and inspiring conversations about how society treats its heroes. Within days, letters began arriving at the palace from veterans and seniors across the nation. They shared their own stories of feeling forgotten, overlooked, and separated from the very institutions they had served to protect. Each letter carried the same underlying message. They didn't want special treatment, they just wanted to feel valued and remembered. Marcus found himself staying late each evening, reading through the letters with his fellow guards. Stories of war veterans living in poverty, elderly citizens struggling with loneliness, and forgotten heroes who had given their youth for their country's freedom filled page after page. The guards realized they had the power to do more than just stand at attention. They could stand up for those who needed them most. 3 weeks after Albert's visit, Marcus stood before Colonel Harrison with a proposal that could either end his career or transform the Royal Guard forever. His hands trembled slightly as he presented a detailed plan he had developed with several other guards during their off-duty hours. The plan was ambitious yet simple. They wanted to establish regular visitation days specifically for veterans and seniors, complete with guided tours, personal meetings with guards, and special ceremonies to honor their service. Marcus had spent countless hours researching similar programs in other countries and consulting with veteran organizations to ensure their approach would be both meaningful and respectful. Colonel Harrison listened intently as Marcus explained how they could implement the program without compromising security or interfering with royal duties. The guards had volunteered their personal time, developed safety protocols, and even secured preliminary approval from several veteran organizations who were eager to participate. What impressed the colonel most was the genuine passion in Marcus's voice and the detailed planning that had gone into every aspect of the proposal. This wasn't just a feel-good gesture. It was a well-thought-out initiative that could genuinely impact lives while honoring the Royal Guard's commitment to service. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Colonel Harrison smiled and gave his approval for a trial program. However, he had one condition. The program needed royal approval, which meant Marcus would have to present his idea to the palace administration and potentially even members of the royal family themselves. The thought of addressing royalty about his grassroots initiative terrified Marcus, but he knew this was too important to abandon. With the support of his fellow guards, he prepared for the most important presentation of his life. They gathered testimonials from veterans, documented the positive response from the community, and created a comprehensive overview of how the program would operate. On the day of the presentation, Marcus found himself in an ornate conference room, facing officials he had only seen from a distance during ceremonies. His voice cracked slightly as he began, but as he shared Albert's story and the hundreds of letters they had received, his confidence grew stronger. The room fell silent when Marcus finished his presentation. The head administrator, a stern woman, known for her strict adherence to protocol, surprised everyone by asking detailed questions about implementation and long-term sustainability. Her interest wasn't skeptical. It was genuinely curious and supportive. 2 days later, Marcus received word that his program had been approved for a 6-month trial period. The news spread through the guard unit like wildfire, with everyone eager to contribute to making the program successful. They spent the following weeks preparing, training, and coordinating with veteran organizations and senior centers across the region. The first official Heroes Honor Day was scheduled for a crisp autumn morning. Marcus arrived at the palace before dawn, his stomach churning with nervous excitement. Everything had to be perfect, not just for the approval of his superiors, but for the veterans and seniors who would be attending. As the sun rose, buses began arriving at the palace gates. Marcus watched through the window as elderly men and women, some using walkers, others in wheelchairs, slowly made their way toward the entrance. Many wore their old military uniforms, medals polished to a brilliant shine, pride evident in every step despite their physical limitations. Albert Thompson was among the first to arrive, but he wasn't alone. He had brought his neighbor, Mrs. Catherine Mills, an 80-year-old widow whose husband had died in the Korean War. She clutched a faded photograph of her late husband in his military uniform, her eyes bright with anticipation for the day ahead. The first Heroes Honor Day exceeded everyone's expectations in ways no one could have imagined. As Marcus escorted the group of 50 veterans and seniors through the palace gates, he watched their faces transform from uncertainty to wonder to pure joy. Many of them had never been inside the palace grounds, and the significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. Mrs. Catherine Mills stopped suddenly in the middle of the courtyard, her weathered hand covering her mouth as tears flowed freely. When Marcus approached her with concern, she whispered that her late husband had always dreamed of seeing the palace up close. She felt as though he was walking beside her, finally able to experience something that had been beyond his reach during his lifetime. The guards had prepared a special ceremony that honored each visitor individually. Instead of the usual formal changing of the guard, they created a personalized experience where each veteran or senior was recognized by name, their service acknowledged, and their sacrifice honored. The emotional impact was immediate and profound for everyone involved. During the tour, Marcus noticed how the interactions between guards and visitors became deeply personal. Guard members found themselves sharing stories about their own families, listening to war experiences they had only read about in history books, and forming connections that went far beyond their official duties. One particularly moving moment occurred when 90-year-old Frank Rodriguez, a decorated World War II veteran, struggled to stand during the ceremony. Without hesitation, 2 guards moved to support him, not just physically but with genuine respect and admiration. Frank later told Marcus it was the first time in decades that he felt truly valued by his country. The success of the first event was measured not in protocol followed or procedures completed, but in the smiles, tears, and genuine gratitude of the participants. Local media covered the event, but more importantly, word spread through veteran communities and senior centers organically, creating a demand for future events that surprised even Marcus. Within a month, the program had a waiting list of over 300 people. Veterans were driving from neighboring cities, families were organizing trips around the events, and senior living facilities were coordinating group visits. The Royal Guard found themselves at the center of a movement that was bringing healing and recognition to forgotten heroes across the region. However, success also brought challenges. The logistics of managing larger groups while maintaining security became increasingly complex. Some critics questioned whether the Royal Guard was overstepping its traditional role, while others worried about the resources being dedicated to the program during a time of budget constraints. Marcus found himself working longer hours, coordinating with multiple organizations and defending the program to skeptics within the military hierarchy. The physical and emotional demands were taking their toll, but every letter of thanks and every tear of joy from participants reminded him why the ED work was essential. The breakthrough moment came during the fifth event when an unexpected visitor arrived. Princess Margaret, known for her work with charitable organizations, had requested a private visit to observe the program. Marcus had only 30 minutes' notice before her arrival, sending the entire guard unit into a carefully controlled frenzy of preparation. When the princess arrived, she didn't observe from a distance as everyone expected. Instead, she moved through the group of veterans and seniors, engaging in genuine conversations, listening to their stories, and asking thoughtful questions about their experiences. Her presence elevated the entire event, but more importantly, it validated the program's mission in a way that silenced critics. After the ceremony, Princess Margaret met privately with Marcus and his team. She commended their initiative and creativity, but what touched Marcus most was her personal commitment to supporting the program's expansion. She understood that this wasn't just about ceremonial gestures. It was about healing wounds, honoring sacrifice, and building bridges between generations of service members. The princess's endorsement transformed the program from a trial initiative into a permanent part of the Royal Guard's mission. Funding was secured, additional staff was assigned, and plans began for expanding the program to reach veterans and seniors in remote areas who couldn't travel to the palace. 6 months into the program, Marcus received a phone call that would test everything they had built. The voice on the other end belonged to Sarah Mitchell, a social worker from a veterans hospice center 3 hours away. She was calling about James Patterson, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran who was dying and had one final wish: to visit the palace and meet the guards who were honoring veterans like him. James had been following the Heroes Honor Day program through newspaper, articles, and social media posts shared by his daughter. Despite his terminal cancer diagnosis, he maintained hope that he might be strong enough to attend an event. However, his condition had deteriorated rapidly, and doctors estimated he had only weeks to live. The request presented an unprecedented challenge. James was too ill to travel, too weak to participate in a regular event, and his situation fell outside all established protocols. Marcus faced a difficult decision: stick to the program guidelines or find a way to honor a dying veteran's final wish. After consulting with Colonel Harrison and the medical staff at the hospice, Marcus proposed something that had never been done before. If James couldn't come to the palace, perhaps the palace could come to James. Within 48 hours, Marcus and 3 other guards loaded a van with ceremonial equipment and drove 3 hours to the hospice center. The hospice was a modest facility that served veterans from across the region. As Marcus and his team arrived in their full ceremonial uniforms, residents who were able to move gathered in the main lounge. James Patterson lay in a hospital bed that had been wheeled to the center of the room, his family surrounding him with tears of gratitude. What was planned as a brief ceremony for one man became a celebration for 37 residents of the facility. Guards who had prepared for a simple honor presentation found themselves spending hours listening to stories, shaking hands with men who had served in wars spanning from World War II to recent conflicts in the Middle East. James Patterson's eyes lit up when Marcus approached his bedside and presented him with a certificate of honor signed by the entire Royal Guard unit. His voice was weak, but his words were clear as he thanked Marcus for reminding him that his service still mattered. The ceremony concluded with James leading everyone in a salute that brought tears to every eye in the room. 2 weeks later, Marcus received word that James Patterson had passed away peacefully. His daughter called to say that the visit from the Royal Guard had given her father the closure and recognition he needed in his final days. She also mentioned that James had spent his remaining time encouraging other residents to apply for future Heroes' Honor Day events. The hospice visit became a turning point for the program. Word spread through the veteran community about guards who would go anywhere to honor their service. Requests began coming in from nursing homes, veteran hospitals, and assisted living facilities across the country. Each request represented another opportunity to reach veterans and seniors who couldn't come to the palace. Marcus realized they needed to expand their approach significantly. Working with Colonel Harrison and the program's growing support team, they developed a mobile outreach component that could bring ceremonial honors directly to those who needed them most. Volunteer guards signed up for weekend trips, retirement ceremonies were conducted in hospital rooms, and small groups of guards began making regular visits to senior centers. The mobile program required different skills than palace ceremonies. Guards learned to adapt their presentations for various settings, work with medical equipment, and provide emotional support to families dealing with loss and aging. What started as military protocol evolved into something much more personal and meaningful. One particularly memorable outreach event took place at a rural senior center that served a farming community. The center's director had written to request a visit for their residents, many of whom were former military members who had returned to agriculture after their service. The facility had limited resources, and most residents rarely received visitors from outside their small community. When Marcus and his team arrived at the humble community center, they found it decorated with handmade banners and flowers picked from residents' gardens. 32 seniors waited eagerly, dressed in their finest clothes, some wearing military decorations they hadn't displayed in years. The ceremony took place in a simple room with folding chairs, but the dignity and respect shown rivaled any palace event. The success of the mobile program caught the attention of veteran organizations nationwide, who began requesting similar services in their regions. Marcus found himself consulting with other military units, sharing strategies and protocols that could be adapted to different contexts and communities. 1 year after the program began, Marcus stood in the same courtyard where he had first noticed Albert Thompson, but everything had changed. The Heroes' Honor Day program had grown from a simple gesture into a nationwide movement that was being replicated by military units across the country. However, success brought unexpected challenges that tested Marcus's leadership in ways he never anticipated. The program's popularity had created a bureaucratic maze of approval processes, safety regulations, and administrative requirements that threatened to suffocate the personal connections that made it special. Marcus found himself spending more time in meetings and filling out forms than actually interacting with veterans and seniors. The spontaneous, heartfelt nature of early events was being replaced by rigid schedules and standardized procedures. More troubling was the growing criticism from some military traditionalists who believed the Royal Guard was compromising its primary mission of protecting royal interests. Anonymous complaints had been filed suggesting that the emotional involvement of guards was unprofessional and that resources were being diverted from essential security duties. The breaking point came during a routine palace ceremony when Colonel Harrison pulled Marcus aside with disturbing news. A formal review had been ordered to evaluate whether the Heroes' Honor program should continue. Critics within the military hierarchy were questioning everything from security protocols to financial costs, and Marcus had 1 month to prove the program's value beyond any doubt. The pressure was intense, but Marcus wasn't alone in his fight to preserve the program. Letters of support poured in from veterans, families, and community organizations across the country. Local news stations began featuring stories about the positive impact of the program, and social media campaigns emerged organically from people whose lives had been touched by the Guards' compassion. Most significantly, the Guards themselves rallied around the program they had helped create. Many volunteered to testify about how their involvement had improved their own sense of purpose and dedication to service. They argued that connecting with veterans and seniors had made them better guards, not worse ones, by reminding them of the deeper meaning behind their ceremonial duties. Marcus prepared for the formal review by documenting every aspect of the program's impact. He compiled statistics showing improved morale among Guard members, testimonials from hundreds of participants, and evidence of positive media coverage that had enhanced the Royal Guard's reputation. However, he knew that numbers alone wouldn't be enough to save something that was fundamentally about human connection and compassion. The review took place in the same ornate conference room where Marcus had first presented his proposal a year earlier. This time, however, he faced a panel of senior military officials, palace administrators, and even representatives from the royal household. The atmosphere was formal and intimidating, with several panel members appearing skeptical from the moment he began his presentation. Marcus started by sharing Albert Thompson's story, just as he had a year ago. But this time, he had hundreds of similar stories to draw upon. He spoke about James Patterson's final wish, Mrs. Catherine Mill's tears of joy, and countless other moments when simple gestures of respect had transformed lives. The room remained silent, faces impassive, giving no indication of how his words were being received. When Marcus finished his presentation, the questioning began immediately. Panel members grilled him about security breaches, budget overruns, and deviation from traditional Guard duties. Each question felt like an attack on everything he and his team had worked to build. Marcus answered as thoroughly as possible, but he could sense the skepticism in the room growing stronger. Just when the situation seemed hopeless, the conference room door opened unexpectedly. Princess Margaret entered, followed by Albert Thompson, who was using a walker but moving with determination. The princess had arranged for Albert to address the panel personally, giving him the opportunity to speak for all the veterans and seniors who had been impacted by the program. Albert's voice was quiet but steady as he told the panel about his experience over the past year. He described how the program had given him a renewed sense of pride in his military service and had connected him with other veterans who had become close friends. Most importantly, he explained how the Guard's compassion had helped heal emotional wounds that had remained open for decades. The room was completely silent when Albert finished speaking. Several panel members who had seemed hostile earlier now appeared thoughtful and moved. Princess Margaret then addressed the panel, emphasizing that the Heroes' Honor program represented the very best of what the Royal Guard could offer, not just ceremonial precision, but genuine service to those who had served their country. 3 days after the formal review, Marcus received the call that would determine the future of everything he had worked to build. Colonel Harrison's voice was uncharacteristically emotional as he delivered the news. The program had not only been approved to continue, but it was being expanded and officially incorporated into the Royal Guard's permanent mission statement. The panel had been so impressed by the testimonials and evidence of positive impact that they recommended increasing funding and staff allocation for the program. More importantly, they had recognized that the Heroes' Honor initiative had actually enhanced the Royal Guard's reputation and effectiveness rather than detracting from it. Within weeks, Marcus found himself promoted to program director, with a team of dedicated Guards and civilian staff members working under his supervision. The program expanded to include quarterly events at the palace, monthly mobile visits to facilities across the region, and a new initiative to provide ceremonial honors at veteran funerals for families who requested them. The transformation was remarkable. What had begun as Marcus's simple gesture of kindness toward Albert Thompson had evolved into a comprehensive support network for veterans and seniors nationwide. Other military units began implementing similar programs, and Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and training sessions across the country. However, the most meaningful changes were the personal connections that continued to develop between Guards and the veterans and seniors they served. Marcus often received updates about participants, news of grandchildren's achievements, invitations to family celebrations, and sometimes, sadly, notices about memorial services. The guards had become more than ceremonial figures. They had become extended family members for many isolated veterans and seniors. Albert Thompson remained a regular participant and became an unofficial ambassador for the program. His friendship with Marcus had deepened over the months, and he often accompanied Marcus on mobile visits to share his story with other veterans. Despite his advancing age, Albert's enthusiasm never wavered, and his presence brought comfort to many participants who were struggling with their own challenges. On the second anniversary of the program, a special ceremony was held at the palace to honor all the veterans and seniors who had participated over the past 2 years. More than 300 people attended, including many family members and friends who had witnessed the positive impact of their loved ones' involvement in the program. Marcus stood before the assembled crowd, no longer the nervous guard who had first approached Albert at the palace gates. He had grown into a confident leader who understood that true service meant more than following orders or maintaining protocol. It meant recognizing the humanity in others and responding with compassion and respect. As he looked out at the faces in the audience, Marcus saw the living proof of what could happen when people chose connection over separation, compassion over indifference. The elderly veteran sitting in the front row represented decades of sacrifice and service that deserved recognition and honor. The guards standing at attention around the perimeter had learned that their greatest strength came not from their weapons or training, but from their ability to show genuine care for others. The ceremony concluded with a moment that brought the entire journey full circle. Albert Thompson, now 83 and moving slowly but with dignity, approached the podium to address the crowd. His voice carried clearly across the courtyard as he spoke about the transformation he had witnessed, not just in the program, but in the hearts of everyone involved. Albert's final words that day became the unofficial motto of the Heroes Honor Program. "We served our country with pride, but these guards have served our hearts with compassion. They reminded us that our service mattered, our sacrifices were remembered, and our stories deserved to be heard." As the ceremony ended and guests began to mingle, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. A simple act of kindness toward one lonely veteran had grown into something that touched thousands of lives and transformed an entire military unit's understanding of their purpose. The program continued to grow and evolve, but its core mission remained unchanged: to honor those who had served their country by showing them the respect, dignity, and compassion they deserved. In doing so, the Royal Guards discovered that the greatest honor came not from the ceremonies they performed, but from the lives they touched and the healing they helped provide to heroes who had given so much for others.